Welcome to Matokyo Talks, issue 6. My name is Stefan Simion. I am teaching architecture at Ion Mincu University. And I just want to say a few words about our initiative. Matokyo Talks is a series of lectures initiated by Matsokyo. And Matsokyo, in turn, is an architectural magazine which has been initiated by Poster, our office, architectural office, led by Namelitz and myself. And also Matsokyo is an academic studio in Ion Mincu University for second and third year, led by Cristi Borcan, Emil Burba, and myself. I would like to welcome today Floris de Bruin from the Belgium office GAFPA. I feel very appreciative to your presence among us. Just wanted to say that the attendance is mainly constituted by our students from second year and from other studios as well. Ion Mincu has more or less 10 architectural studios each year. Your presence here is during the project for students for 7-8 houses in the center of Bucharest. They are working on this project in various studios. And I also want to say that Floris de Bruin with Gustav Jepson will be guest architects invited to a jury in our studio later on this semester. A few words about GAFPA, which is a Belgian office, which I admire very much via internet, of course. I discovered your projects via the main channels, Divisare and Arch Daily, and then I simply went on to your website and I stayed with your projects and the photographs and some texts you have written there, and I really appreciate them very much. GAFPA was established in 2008 by Floris de Bruin, Philippe de Berlanger, and Frederick Verschueren, shortly after finishing their studies at St. Lucas in Ghent. I want to say, to give this introduction, to point out that your office is a very active office, which is also involved in practice and also academia. You are a published office. You are nominated and awarded. And it feels very important to me today, to our students, but also to our architects community in Romania, to emphasize this fact that an architectural office can be involved in both theory and practice, and in this double action, act as a cultural ambassador, of architecture. And it feels really important that all architects should think of that. And I would like to quote the phrase which you put on your website, and which is very short and clear, but very deep on many levels. The architectural firm from Ghent is known for its pragmatic approach. They dismantle an existing context and transform it into a new reality. This method of systematic deconstruction results invariably in new interpretations of architecture, a vocabulary all of their own. And of course, I'm looking forward to your lecture today to touch on these points. It feels very important because I think today we need to look to the built heritage in, of course, we know the European cities which we inhabit, but to use this built heritage in an active way, and not just to protect it, but to work with it and to use it in a manner as contemporary as possible. And this revalue of the built heritage feels very important to me. And looking closely to your projects, it feels to me that you also take on the urban stakes, but also on the architectural stakes. And this meeting of architecture and the city is very important to us. Having said that, I would just want to say the rules of the meeting to everybody present here. Please, if possible, keep your webcams on and the microphones off. And if you have any questions, please write them at the chat in the chat area of Zoom. And at the end of the lecture, I will read them to Floris. So Floris, please, you have the room, and share the screen if you want.
All right. Okay, thank you, Stefan. Also for the invitation and all of you to be present today. It's always nice to see new faces, although it's not in person. But today I would like to show some projects of the office. I've selected a few housing projects mainly because of, I think, they're very important to us. We are evolving to more and more larger projects, but we still continue to do very small interventions and housing projects because they're often, as in the beginning, but still now are kind of a testing ground, a free space to test ideas and to come up with new ways of dealing with materials. Which is often not so easy to experiment with in bigger projects. So it's a kind of way of building up experience. You can see my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So I've selected 6 projects. The first one is a project in Ghent where we did a kind of a refurbishment or renovation of an old stone masonry. And you see it's a special location in the sense that you have a kind of courtyard, which is reachable from the street. And then it's really built into the fabric in a very dense way. What we did, this was the first meeting with the client in Red at the space, and he wanted to build a house there, and he's a friend of us. He's a carpenter and an artist, and yeah, with a limited budget, he wanted to make a house. And so what we did was we analyzed the situation, which we always do. We try to really look very closely to what is there. And here we stripped the situation and the whole structure, and we cut away the roof of this portion so you could get a garden. And then we convinced the client, instead of his initial question to kind of fill the whole space, we convinced him to build a more modest, smaller house within the existing hall. And we were intrigued by the systematic base, which was a concrete structures, and there was a steel structure built into it. You can see it here in this. This is the concrete, and then the steel, which was later put in, and you could already see the layers coming. So they cut away the concrete beams and making a metal structure in there. So what we decided to add like another layer to extend this kind of knowledge and to take this simply the same base of the concrete rhythm and the steel, and then within the same rhythm we copied actually in wood the structure. And we were intrigued by the simple fact you find a lot in these old structures. This is a concrete beam with a kind of extension in concrete, and then the secondary beams are not on top of the columns. So they actually take 1/4 of the span. And we copied this system because it was, we talked with our engineer, Arthur, and he said it was an interesting way of optimizing the beams. And this is his first sketch. And basically by copying it, we optimized the structure, but at the same time, we also built into the fabric. And it's very important for us not to do kind of pre-intervention. No, it's something that has to grow from the space. And we simply did it at 3 levels, like the ground floor, first and second. And we thought of it as a all in wood as a structure. And this is the drawing of the engineer, which basically is also what we did. So our projects, especially the beginning ones, but still again, a lot of times limited budgets, and you have to do as much as you can with the limited elements that you get. So the drawing of the engineer is basically also almost a finished project, you could say. What was interesting is that we did the floor and the roof in wood, and there's actually boards of 60 centimeters wide, but 6 centimeters in height, and they're already the ceiling and the floor, so there's nothing extra. There's no extra layers which are added, so it's already a finished product. And here you can see the construction drawing. We simply added a layer on top of it to finish it, because we really like the idea of a kind of basic structure that can be finished by the client actually. And here are the details. And so the structure is perfectly clear. And then we added standard windows on the outside, but just simply by managing interesting details from the inside, you get a kind of frameless idea of windows, but actually they're basic, cheap wooden windows. But just by applying them in the right way, you get this extra detailing. And here you can see the basic structure, and there are no bearing walls in it. So it's all being done in different phases in the end by the client himself. We basically had this kind of almost a building package, you could say. But of course, we do manage a lot or think about the way the elements meet. And here you can see it's almost like a massive wooden construction. But if you can see closely, it's actually metal bars which are rammed into the wood. So you do not have any bolts or anything. So it's like just a friction, a way of dealing with friction in the components. And that's why it's almost made in one piece, you could say. And this is then the structure. And for us, this construction moments are very important. We also do our photography ourselves, and we go to the site, and basically then there already has to happen something. It's not that we wait for the finishing to, this is already has the energy of the project should already be there. And we're very conscious of the idea that this is a primary structure which you actually give to the client, but also in the afterwards he can sell the house and somebody else can make it his own or her own. And in that sense, it's almost a kind of framework for life, you could say, that we offer. And this is the way you approach the house. Here you can see. So what we did is we kept the initial shed structure. And what we did, of course, is to build smaller than the width of the plot. So you already see here the canopy that you have serves for the protection of overheating, but also to have this kind of flexible in-between space. And maybe some nice things that to prove that we really try to find the edge. If you see the floor, this is a basic concrete floor, but it is already the foundations that you see. And maybe I should go back to this actually, is that we the structural floor is on top and the insulation is in the bottom. So there's no extra layers on top of the foundation floor. And in that sense, it's the most basic you can do. It also limits the discussions with your clients of what type of floor should be in the end there. I mean, these are things that you will all experience, these kind of nice discussions. And because just limiting to this and it's only budget, you can just, what we did was polish the floor, and you see the stones basically in there. And what's of course important with the engineer, he thought of a system. They use it in industrial construction. This is actually, here you can see this line. It's a metal reinforcement which allows the structure to move in a horizontal way, but not in a vertical way. Because if the floor heating is also attached to the reinforcement bars, and that because of that, the structure would like move and it would crack, because 20 meters long, and you would simply get cracks in your floor. So in that sense, it's a kind of using these industrial ways of working, because that's the way they do it in industrial buildings. But finding a new way to implying it here. And it's interesting that people ask, okay, what kind of stones did you put in your polished floor? But it's actually, it's just simple concrete which you polish. And in that sense, it's interesting for us that people often find things beautiful somehow because they are logic, or it's something that has grown to be beautiful simply because it is simple. And as soon as people start to have to make choices, it's more difficult. You really need this taste level to kind of fix everything. But that's not what we do. We basically make a kind of package, and the building comes from these decisions actually. And then simple ideas is that the opening windows are closed. They're making we fix it with wood, and then the fixed windows are glass. And the idea is that in the summertime you open up the shutters, you could say, and then the whole box is transparent. So in that sense, you play a bit with opened and closed particles. And this is the in-between space, which is very important for us, is that it is a kind of free space. You can use it as a kind of playing ground, and there's also a direct connection to the courtyard, so you could easily skip the front door and just use this space to go to the garden. Has this kind of freedom in it. This is a small extension we did also for a friend of ours. Also, it's a very typical common work among architects. It's usually the first things you do is like these kind of extensions here in Flanders. And it's always a limited budget, but also how to make something that is particular, how to deal with this always the same question, but giving it value. And here we wanted to give as much space as possible. So we had this sloped roof idea. And we came up with, we had this discussions with the engineer. If when you do a sloped roof, you have these kind of forces and you should put cables to kind of hold it together. And we wanted to avoid these because it's quite a big roof. And we came up with the idea of stiffening the central beam, and not by making him heavier, because we didn't want that. We made a Vierendeel truss, which is 2 meters high, but very thin. So in that sense, it's a very delicate element. But we really like the idea of being stiff in one way and very almost too thin to be constructive in the other. And we simply laid it on top of one beam, which is on top of the party walls. And here you see again, we try to find clues in the existing, like for example, this line is a very typical line because of the stairs. And then we continue this line. So there's like no discussion where almost it's this line. So in that sense, we always try to find these alibis, you could say. Which ties the project to the existing. And in that sense, it's a very simple plan. And then we obviously, if you have this kind of roof, you have this window, which is a bit lower, which is here for the staircase. So we cut out simply a portion of this roof, and then we could also bring light in there. And by dividing the Vierendeel truss, it should be square in 3 times. You can have one, which is a window to get into the light, because we're like, we cannot handle the idea of just putting a roof light somewhere. We want to know why, how big. So this is just simply a system, with a friction, and then the problem always of bringing light into the darkest part is in that sense solved. And also what was interesting is with the engineer, we came up with the idea of this Vierendeel truss. Because of it being very slender, it is not a frame. So in that sense, it's more like a truss. So in that sense, you have this kind of diagonal, and you could have the same on the right side. But as you can see, you also have the thickness of the roof with the insulation. So in that sense, we had another way of stiffening it, and that we came up was just a thick plate of steel, which is welded all the way through. So it's the same way of stiffening this, but in another way. And of course, by that, you fix the thickness problem. But we like it. It's almost a kind of educational drawing of what types of ways you can have to make it stiff. And this is the element we had to put on it. And the engineers or the contractors were like saying it's really unstable, but by putting it on 2 sides with these insulated panels, you can stiffen it also. So in that sense, again, we're very, but like a lot of architects, we're very influenced by Prouvé, the way of like with some standards elements, trying to find something which is not generic, which is very context-like, basically, and also the hybrid character. Every element works, and in the end, it's a whole. It's not like, so in that sense, you know, every element is like at the edge of the forces. at the limits, and that's what really interests us. And these are a bit of construction pictures, and this is then the final picture we took, and also here simple things. We wanted to have a kind of canopy, but we wanted something very simple, and in that sense we had these kind of Z profiles you can see there, which are used in this type of steel construction, and you can see it here. Because of it comes from the roof, you can have them very slender, because if you would have, normally you would have a thermal break and then making something which should be very heavy in that sense. Now we come from the roof already from here, so it can be very thin. And we simply, it's a Z profile, which we doubled, simply put two of these very thin profiles in each other, and that's why they're twice as strong. So with these basic elements, you should normally already need to fix your corrugated metal. You can already make a kind of a span. So these are very simple things, but we like the fact that you could almost build it yourself, you could say. These kind of things are of interest to us. And this is a house, also an extension for this is the street facade, and here you have this this gate, and then at the back there was an old factory which was basically very bad. I mean, you could not reuse it, but there were a few elements. Of course, these elements is where the second stories are on top. So we decided, of course, to use them and to keep them as they were. But like simple elements, like there's a round column here, which is concrete, and then it's the easiest way. It's like a plastic tube where they put concrete in. And so basically in the end, we demolished it, but they're like elements, this round column somehow sparked something. So in the end, we used it in the construction. It's always something, finding layers and trying to do something with it. And this is then the plan. And here you have the front house. And then we integrated the biggest rectangle we could as one large space. And then the leftovers are the outside spaces, because we really like to do a kind of one basic action, and then things should come. So the outside spaces are just a result of this simple action. And then you see that it's a whole wooden roof, basically, the project, and there's one column which is there, and this is this round column. And it's nice that if you have in the whole project one column, this column starts to have this kind of importance somehow. And then we built in, we had the party walls, of course, and the layers of the rooms. And we did it in this insulating stone, which is basically normally the first stone in your construction because it's cellular. But we decided to do everything with this stone. So it's not only the one stone, but we continued because of its insulated capacities. But of course, it's very delicate. It's a stone which is not normally used for this type of construction, or at least you should normally plaster it. We didn't, so we really took care of this stone also in terms of the construction site and stuff like that. And we built on top of the old existing floor. This is because if you had to demolish it, it would become too costly, too expensive. It's also nice to keep this also as a layer. And then we simply cut big holes to put trees in there. And this is the construction where you have this round column, and then you have the bigger wooden beams. And then the shortest span is always with the secondary beams. And this is just a detail. I just put it in there because I got from Stefan that it's interesting for you to understand how things work. And these are things very basic, but what we did was, instead of putting a beam here underneath these, we did the reverse. We used what we already, normally you should have this higher portion to kind of close the roof, but we made it structural. So we had like an upside down beam, or like which is put on top, and we hang the secondary beams from it. So in that sense, you have a detail where you can have more light entering the room because you do not have this beam underneath it. And then simply by detailing basic windows, but like more higher, you also have the same idea of like from the interior you have less frame, and then on the outside you can see it. And then we, as a finishing, it's all only roof material, which we just continued all the way. So with these kind of basic elements, we try to finish the structure, because we're very aware in terms of costs, is that if you have one contractor doing a lot, it's easier than having all different types of materials and stuff like that. So we keep it very basic, and in that sense, we have a kind of control over the situation. And here you can see then these beams which are suspended from the upside down beam. And then also when the forces become too heavy for the stone, we have these prefabricated concrete elements which are exactly the same size of the stones. So we just simply make them. So these are things we do look into to get them right. So because if you would do that on the site and pour it, you could never get it right. So it has to be prefabricated to kind of fix this. And then here you have this in-between space of the garage, which is also the entrance for the house. And then we really like to simply show the different layers that are present in the situation. And these are actually very narrow, but at the same time, because of their height and transparency, they introduce a lot of light and free space when you open the windows. And then a bit bigger project, which is for a woodworking company, which we got to know very well. They worked at the site. We are at an industrial site, and they also had their factory there, and we kind of started working together. And now they asked us to make their own factory, the new factory. And it was an interesting experiment because of the scale, but also again limited means, and trying to work with basic industrial elements, because if you look at how these buildings are made, there's a kind of very fixed pattern of the concrete system that you always need to use. And we came up with an idea. They first, of course, they wanted their production hall, and then in front they wanted this fancy office, right, to show who they are. And we convinced them, okay, no, just do one nice hall, because that's what you are, that's what you do, and try to invite people into your world, you could say. And we came up with the idea, instead of a front parking and then this fancy office, we actually put it more to the front, the whole building. So you get a limited parking at the back, but we came up with the idea of a kind of covered space because they also had this kind of, to get the products there and then to unload. And we offered them, because we really need to convince them, because it was not easy, because it was extra and basically they didn't need it, you could say. We offered this very big covered space as an entrance space as well for the unloading dock, but also for the offices they had. So you can come into this world, you could say. And then we had a simple concrete column system. And of course we had to cut this with the Vierendeel truss, which you remember from the past project. That's why I put them after each other. They're like simple ideas, but you get them into your head and you take them to the next project, you could say. And there you cut them, and then you put the Vierendeel truss. And then here on the right, you have these offices, very slender in one bay. And then you have the covered space with a kind of outside courtyard. And then you have the main production hall. And these are the three different sections of the site. On top is the production hall. Then in the middle is the courtyard, which is open at the end. And then you have the working space, you could say. And then these simple different sections always give you a kind of, with the same facade, because you have 4 meters of glass, and then we have a wooden facade. So you have here a very top lighting, and then here it's covered, and then here you have, because working on the first floor, you have a different relation with the roof light. And then, of course, important to say is that we for fire regulations, we had on the other side, we had a concrete U shape, but then we put it fully in wood. Because of doing that, obviously they could make it themselves, but also we decided to cover it to protect the wood, and that's why you have this kind of shadow also for the window lights you have above. So it's a kind of double way, but it's also interesting to have this character on this side, to really have a different expression, you could say. And this is then just the way you get it back, and then it's a way of negotiating, because it's again limited budget. They're also contractors themselves, so they kind of rely on us to ask some questions. We draw some details, but it's not like you have every bolt under control. So it's always a kind of negotiation, but it's interesting because if your ideas are strong enough, then usually they will stick. And in that sense, because of course you know each other, you can have this interesting dialogue. And these are a bit of the construction photographs. And the scale was, of course, impressive for us because of the height. And this is, well, then the Viernil truss as it was first erected. So again, at the construction site, there should already be something which already attracts your eye. And then here you have, I didn't say it, it's important, is that it's a sloped wooden beam, which normally is reverse, but we reversed it and we put one side perfectly horizontally aligned. And that's why you get an angled roof and you attract more light. So you get this kind of steep section. But it's also just taking something they always use, because they're building a lot of factories also on the other plots, and they're all using the same thing, but like as a normal thing. So it's basically looking how you can do something else with the same element, basically. And that's what we really like. These are the canopies as they're constructed. And then when they're finishing the interiors of the space, and this is the offices, which is at cross-laminated timber as they built it within. So it's a steel structure built within the concrete structure, actually. And then when they were installing the facade, and we really like the play of rhythm of all these elements, which are have their own logic, but like brought together, they become kind of complex systems.
Es que pues aflojamos un poco. No hay forma.
Sorry, I will ask everybody to keep their microphones off.
Okay, I will continue.
I have muted her. Sorry for that.
No problem, no problem. Okay, so here and also these ideas, these are wooden panels, and we really liked from the beginning this idea of like where you normally have these concrete panels, we copied the same panels with the same dimension but in wood. So in that sense, it's also a very simple play of things that are already present, but by changing the material, it becomes something else. And also the wooden, the windows are made by themselves, also just to put glass on top of a known made system. So it's also something that you use, whatever they can do, you use this knowledge to create something. And this is the way it is being used. And it's very interesting because normally you only have roof lights in these kind of factories, but by giving this 4-meter high facade, you really have daylight, which is a very nice working condition. And in the evening, there's a strip of last sunlight entering the factory. So it's really, as a working condition, it's interesting how these things affect the mood. And this is then the covered space where they have barbecues and sit at night. So it's also important that they're somehow in their world, but at the same time covered and outside. So it really works. And these are things that we learn because they sat also at our, where we work. And in nights, they were always underneath a canopy. So we copied this canopy idea from the old side to the new side, of course, in a new way. These are important elements for us. And this is the interior of the factory then. And it's always the direct relation with their courtyard, which makes it interesting. And this is then the facade as it is finished. And now they have constructed something against it. And but they made this themselves, but it's actually interesting that they continue to kind of build this thing. And then the last project is a chapel. We are refurbishing into a house, and of course, very interesting is the location, but also the fact of the heritage was this kind of negotiation how to kind of deal with this heritage. And what was important is that we did something which was reversible. So you could do something, but you have to be able to take everything out, and then the chapel is untouched again. So in that sense, we came up with an idea of making a steel construction within the old framework of the chapel. And also here, the client is a metal worker. So in that sense, it of course made sense that we did everything in metal here, and then we have this close relationship to design all the details with him. And the main idea was to have a kind of central beam, which is the longest possible, which enters the chapel. And then you have this kind of ceiling, which is on top of these two lines, which is in metal steel deck. And it extends to form this kind of, on top of it, it's a hallway. Here you can see the different levels. We put just simply 2 levels, and this is a central beam. So again, it's a play with this X, this central X. And which is interesting is that we suspended the steel deck. But of course, if you would continue it all the way until here, you cannot enter the door anymore. So we closed one door, but then we cut away on one angle to be able to open the door. So again, there we go to the very limits somehow of what is possible, that there is a kind of friction in between the old and the new. And that's what reminds of, that's what we like. That's what makes it interesting. It's not possible to shift it a little bit or something. It has kind of meaning to the place. And then here you can see the construction, and we did a lot of work of, it is not welded on site, which was not possible. So it's prefabricated, but then normally you have these extra welded plates and bolts and stuff like that to kind of put the construction together. And we made a kind of a system which was like, here you can see it, it's some like a pin which is welded on top, and then a hollow tube which is put over this metal pin, and then you have these fine elements to kind of fix it. So in that sense, it looks like it is welded, and we had a lot of discussions about this. It's basically what Mies van der Rohe does always, is like he welds everything on site, which basically for us, it's not possible. But it's interesting how simple he gets his construction, and how it is about construction, but it's also about the refinement. And we really like this delicate balance. And here are some of the construction drawings. I won't get too much into it, but just simply because of the beam cannot be in one piece, you can have a kind of interesting element to kind of join them together. But it should also have the beauty of the connection itself. So it's all things that we like to think about. And of course, I think it's 5 centimeters, these tubes, so they're very limited. So this kind of delicacy is also of interest to us. And here we're now starting to finish the interiors and stuff like that. So everything is in wood built into it. And then also interesting, just simple things, just how to make a balustrade, a kind of a protection. It's interesting because it's a dry system. So the steel deck is higher than normal because we do not have a concrete layer. So it's a bit higher, and there's only a wooden plate on top of the steel deck. So basically you don't have anything to fix your balustrade. It's just thin. The metal of the steel deck is like, let's say 2 millimeters or at most, so it's nothing basically. The strength is like in the plane. So in that sense, these simple things lead to more difficult solutions or ways of like welding a kind of a plate which is underneath the wooden board, which is on top of the steel deck, to kind of hold it. So in that sense, it's a very simple thing, but it's something that you need to take into account if you want to have it that thin. And also, yeah, I just put it in there because these are things that we like to think about. Here you can see this beam of the balustrade is like getting into the steel deck. So the height of the steel leg, so we really needed to count and to fix this rhythm from the steel leg. And then you have this thickness, which is going into the kind of openings of the steel leg. So in that sense, it's a very measured and detailed work, which normally you couldn't be able to do with a normal contractor. This is just a guy who does it himself. So in that sense, you can have this dialogue and really measuring it and do it one step at a time. So that makes it quite interesting. And here you have the perforated, and yeah, the steel leg is perforated also for acoustical reasons, but it makes it even more delicate, you could say. And then we put thermal heating, but we will get the old floor back. So we recuperated it and we will restore it back as it was, basically. So in that sense, you get this very thin metal construction, which is on there. And then we put one opening, which is quite a discussion with the Heritage Foundation, but we kind of figured that with these windows, which we restored also, you cannot have the outside experience. So there's one opening just on the side because the stairs are there. And we will have the new entrance to the chapel will be here. We're now making a stair there. But also it's a very clear cut opening, which somehow also has a bit of friction with the whole situation. And then I don't know whether I have the time. I have one more project.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Please do. Yes.
So the last one is a project in Lierde, also in Belgium, which was interesting. The situation we found was this is a kind of old barn, you could say, and we had to make an extension. And again, there we were looking for some clues. And basically, what we did is like we put this volume, we cut it in two, and then we kind of mirrored it along an axis on 45 degrees. Because we wanted to basically make an extension and still, because it was a new material, new function, we shifted it. And this line is shifted onto this extra extension on the side. So all the lines are there and you simply, with the elements that are already present, you make a kind of new constellation. But we really like the idea that it's a new whole in the end. And it's also a situation, if you drive around in Belgium, you find these old barns and usually they try to kind of make a sheltered space. So they build their barns against each other. And there are blunt ones where they simply somehow interact because you always have to have one space which needs to go to the next space, just by building them together. You have this kind of passageway, and we try to have this simple system, but we perfect it somehow within this 45-degree angle, and it's a full wooden construction, and it's basically a shell. So there are no interior walls or bearing walls. And here you can see the construction, and it's like a house of cards, you could say. It's because of their angle, it becomes a stiff shell. And here is the construction as it is being done. So it's very furniture-like work. It should all fit perfectly, of course. And then that was interesting to us is this point where these two volumes get into each other, how to make it interesting. And we came up with the idea of like making it suspended there. So to not have a construction point there, but simply putting these two shells together, it's like open. So this whole facade is basically floating, you could say. So that was interesting to find. We had this intuitive idea, it should work. And then with the engineer, of course, you have to test it, whether it's really possible. But it worked. But it's always this kind of tension which is present at the side. So here you can still see a kind of a beam, and they were, for a long time, they stood there, and you're waiting for them to take him away and to feel this kind of construction working. But this tension is always interesting, that you kind of feel it on site. And this is when we are finishing it now with the aluminum skin. And then we had this kind of windows which can be opened and have this kind of free space, so the two spaces kind of flow into each other. And also we made this kind of gutters by simply folding the metal. So all these kind of details make it at the same time very rustic. I don't know how to say, but like really local, you could say. But at the same time, it's an interpretation. So these kind of two, yes, this abstraction together with the situation is what interests us. And then just finding a way, of course, again, of how to deal with these elements. And these are very simple details. That's what we draw, and it's almost too simple. It's just what it is. But we like to get to this point that it's not, this is not what it's about. This is just simply a way of respecting the whole and trying the detail not to overpower the rest. It's just a simple way of dealing with everything. And then here you can see when the windows are open, how this space is continued. But they're still finishing it. But it's nice. Yesterday I passed by and took these last pictures just to show that it's almost finished now. But like simple ideas, you have always the same problem, how to get this water to the facade, and just by putting the triangle, it's almost like a logic, which is as a mirroring of the 45-degree angle, all these kind of things, not too much, but just we try to fix it, and then when there's some links to what is there, it's interesting for us. It's like not trying to find it too much, but like being attentive to simple solution which kind of fits the project. And this is basically what it is now. And the interior should be finished, needs some small finishes, but this is the situation. Well, that's it.
Thank you very much, Floris. We're going to the question and answer session, and we already have two questions. If you have further questions, everybody please just write them down here, and I will ask them. The first question: in the first project presented, why was the wood the main material of choice? And I would add here, Floris, that was also one of my questions regarding the lightness that I observed to your questions, to your projects. I mean, most of your projects, if I am correct, are in wood, in metal, are light structures, not you know, heavy in the tectonic sense.
Well, there are two questions. First one is why wood in the first project?
Yes.
Basically, it is again a connection of seeing what is there. What we like is you have concrete and you have steel. And the story, a good story, three things, you know, this kind of 1, 2, 3. So if you would do it all in metal, it's like concrete, metal, metal. So it's like that made sense. And the second thing is, of course, this guy is a wooden carpenter. I mean, basically he builds in wood. So I mean, there's no question there. But it's for us it makes perfect sense. But it's both. You have ideas about this, but at the same time you look at the situation and you go with it, you know. But like, of course, it's never clean. It's always something that you kind of feel and then thinking, okay. But also, what convinces is the fact if you have a canopy and you put something fully in wood, it is protected. If you would do that in metal or something else, it's too resistant to be protected somehow. It doesn't fit. So the raincoat is already there, and just by even the finishing of the shutters is like the cheapest wood you can find. It's something that is actually not suited as an outside finishing, but by being protected, you can do that, and that makes it for us like, okay, that's good. That's like.
And is wood significantly cheaper in Belgium than?
No, that's interesting because there's a contradiction there. We have limited means, as I already said, but at the same time, we also have ideas about it because we started very early on to use wood, and especially in the beginning, it was much more expensive. But basically, because it's they're not used to using it. Because simply they're used to building with bricks. So that's the cheapest way, building with bricks. But we had this kind of interest in that, and it comes from an idea of lightness, you could say. But of course, there's also the ecological thinking, like, okay, if we can do that, then why not? I mean, that's like a very powerful thing, that it's not a fetish, but like, if you can build ecological, you should. But we're like, we have to do everything in wood because it's better ecologically. No, it has to fit. So it can possibly be that we do something fully in concrete because of the situation and everything, but you always have to think of the next life of this structure. And sometimes, as we are now reusing the concrete structure, it's the same thing. If you do something in concrete, you should always be aware of the second life this can have.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to pass to the next question asked by Emil. You said that you search for a hybrid character of a previous existing element from which you start a context-specific project. Can you argue the philosophy of this anti-generic approach?
Yeah, as I said a bit, it's very interesting that one of the first buildings we built, I didn't include it here, which was a house in Wachtebeke, fully in wood. And there when designing this house, we were like intrigued by Prouvé, and we just rode to Nancy, where he made his house completely not prepared. We didn't even get to enter the house because we just rode to there, just to feel it, to see it. Like, and what is interesting, if you start to analyze, he has all the. We started to argue, why is it unique what he does? What is it that makes it good? It's one thing is that he makes a kind of system, a way of controlling it, of a rhythm or things in building materials. But at the same time, he's also plastically aware of what he's doing. He's not making just a system because he likes the system. He likes making something plastic. The same thing is if the chairs of Prouvé are too heavy, because they show the force somehow, but at the same time, it's also a plastic shape. And all these, he's aware of all these things, but he's also a way of, he has a way of dealing with the circumstances. And that's why we specifically like his own house the best, because it is made of all the elements he had lying around, and because of the situation of the mountain. And then he kind of invented an own way of like making these elements present as a very specific product. So it is both. If everything is specifically made for the site, it's less interesting for us. Understand? It's like he adapts systems to make them specific. And that's why it's always about building and ways of building, using this. Because we are very aware of the economic situation where things are being made. The beams, the sections, everything is already there. You have to use that.
I will ask again everybody to keep your microphones off. Someone is listening to the TV show meanwhile. Thank you. Sorry again for that, Floris. Yes, and we have a third question asked by Vlad and Alex. Structure plays a big part in your projects, and their simplicity is sublime. When during the design process do you start addressing this issue?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, very early on, actually from the start, but we kind of address what is necessary at first. That's the main part. Like, what do you want? Big covered space, what, freedom, something human somehow. What would you like? And then you start to consider what is the shortest, clearest way of achieving this. And in that sense, it should not overpower everything, the structure. It should be there to allow something. And this simplicity is something that we deliberately look for to make it simple and easy. And it's not the simplest way, because that's the difference. It's not the simplest way to arrive at something, but it's like, yeah, it's what is important, and then deciding how to build it, how to make it. And it's from the early on, we had clients who didn't have money to finish it, let alone making rooms in it. There was no money. So it's you have to do it with the elements you can place. And it's really that. It's not that we were academic in that sense. And it's interesting that Stefan mentioned this question, and we only started recently. Well, recently I teach for 10 years now or something, but like the last years, we really involved the office in the teaching and like thinking about, and we really do a lot of analyzing of simple industrial buildings, which are non-architectural, simply pragmatic. And then we have students really look to them and actually present this project as it was a design of themselves. So they have to look in the banality for the beauty, you know? And these kind of things you already get a lot from. It's what
yes,
also...
I wanted to come back now to your, I don't know how to call it, mission statement. It's
yeah.
When you spoke about the pragmatic approach, you know, and then in the end you're talking about you know, these results in a vocabulary all of its own. You know, I mean, you don't speak of the visible form of architecture or about aesthetics, but you are interested only in this way of doing things, and what goes out of this.
Yes, it's we're interested in language, you could say. And as in language, it's like what's the vocabulary? Where can you play? I mean, you do not invent words, right? You get them. You learn them from your parents, and you start to find your own voice as you're starting to learn to speak. And you can talk as everybody talks because they talk that way. That's not interesting. It's always like understanding what are the elements and finding your own voice in that. And it's actually easy, and at the same time, it's one of the most difficult things to unlearn what you already learned, but not to think you have to invent your own language. I mean, it's a collage, right?
Yes, and this implies working with the details and materials and local technique. And I wanted to ask you, you know, I think you were talking about the weekend house earlier.
Yes.
Which is the first house that I discovered of your office. I wanted to ask you, you said now that you have this wooden frame, which already offers you the windows framing, you know, and you simply just have to put the windows onto it. And I wanted to ask you, is that really the case? I mean, isn't it actually, doesn't it take a special detail to put the windows on the exterior of the wooden structure? Or is it a different kind of facade?
Well, if you can, I will share maybe my screen. You're talking about this one, eh?
Yes, yes.
Well, the thing is, like here, as you can see, it's interesting because we had this discussion then. I remember that the price was way too high. You had this German system, which is like, I don't know, the name Stabalik, something like that. And the thing is that it was too expensive and we could not pay it. So we sat down with the contractor and they said, okay, if you have a beam, you can put glass and then have a kind of profile and just screw it to hold it. Basically, it's
so
possible.
It's put on the exterior. From the exterior is the window put.
From the exterior, yeah. It's finished. Here you can see the glass, and then this also these profiles are simple profiles you can get. It's not this German expensive system, you know. So that's also this kind of things. That's why we really like to sit down with contractors and to negotiate. And you cannot do it with bigger projects, so you have to do it with these kind of things because it's possible to talk about it. But and then you learn how some things can become really or done really simple. These guys think that's what they do usually. How can we do it more simple and cheaper? So you can go along with that as long as in the end it's good or satisfying. Makes it simple. And the same here, the facade is the same U-shaped profile as we did it for the wooden panels. So in that sense, it is the same detail all over.
Yes. We have a last question. I'm from Theodora. I will read it. I really like the case study house number 8 reference. Is there a similarity that you found between the chapel before your intervention and the Eames house?
That's a good question. I don't know whether it's literal. Obviously, again, the same reference is there as, I mean, Eames is everybody knows them, but again, their own house is the same thing. It was designed differently, and then they came to the site and decided, no, we will build to the mountain. And this story is known, but this again, they were flexible enough to rethink their system. So in that sense, that's of course the affinity you have. Simply this project linking it to that, I think it's not in that sense. Well, maybe it is. It's like there's also the steel deck thing. If you can look, it's a metal construction basically. So in that sense, it is there. But let's say it's secondary. It's something that you find afterwards, like making the image, rethinking what you do, and then seeing, and then kind of using it. It's also something we do not want to have too much work into our images. The work, I mean, you find an image which already almost incorporates what you want to do, and then you do it. Because we do not want to, we want all the energy to go to the building and not in the representation itself.
Yes.
I also have a question, Stefan.
Yes, Christy, please.
Yeah, because we are in an architectural studio lecture, I have a question about methods or methodology of how you design buildings, because of course, you know, students second, third year, they really struggle with this, how they can start a project or how they can evolve within a project in school. And maybe it's a stupid question for you, but I think it's important for the students. So it seems that you work a lot with details, right? And these details are very detailed, yeah, and they're very, very thought of, yeah. So my question is, when in this process of planning a house, let's say, does these details appear at the very beginning, or at the end, or during the process, or all the way through the process?
Yeah, it's twofold your question. The first one is the students experience a lot of time difficulty starting at something and how to deal with the start of a project. It's very important for us also in the teaching that we introduce this kind of thing, but the way we are ourselves, we're not academic from the start. We try to understand the situation. And what we do now also in the teaching is make them aware of the context, but at all levels. And we really introduce the context in the studio. And they're usually not that used to that. They're like, we want total freedom, or usually there is a total freedom. But we kind of introduce this kind of friction in there. First of all, in the analyzing of what is there and really taking it seriously. And at the same time, making them aware of like, no, this building system exists. I mean, look at it and use elements from that instead of like drawing everything from scratch, stuff like that. So that's important. And then the second thing, when you think about details, I don't know, it's not one magic thing. It's we are very aware of things have to be made, and we try to establish a discussion when we think it is needed. Meaning that if you put something on the other, in the basic scheme of things, like, okay, what do we want? Like, for example, the roof thing, the extension, right? We said we do not want the cables, just a stupid thing, but yeah, we didn't want that. And then immediately the discussion starts, how can you avoid them? So in that sense, it's already detail, you could say, or structure, or whatever. But like these things come from thinking and then already knowing, okay, we will have a problem there. And then we address the problem. If it's not an interesting detail, we will not talk about it until a whole drawings is there. And then, okay, yeah, we do that, but not in the beginning. So it's this understanding which detail is crucial. And the other things are just, you accept that they will become beautiful if your attitude is right. You simply address every problem as it comes. But if you do not understand crucial details, they will become a problem in the end. Like, you cannot get it right. Yeah, but it's a design question also.
Yeah. Okay, and another it's a remark. So you seem to be very flexible about these details, and you said something about negotiating with the clients, with the builders, I don't know, the engineers. So this is also important for you, because again, we are in a school lecture. You know, architectural schools all around the world are teaching architects to be sometimes very not flexible. But maybe this is normal for an, you know, a paper project in school. But when they graduate and they start build things, so is this flexibility important?
I think it is crucial to,
Okay.
yes, I really believe that, because I get sometimes, and it's just a personal idea, and it's not, but that some projects, some architects, you can be astonished by what they can achieve, genuinely, knowing what architecture is like. It's crazy, but at the same time, I'm not interested. Simply because it's overworked and it's personal. I mean, it's not something, everybody can have his own opinion, but to understand this, because something needs to strike a chord. There's some, and it's not money that strikes the chord, right? It's something. And then what is that? And it can be proportion, it can be scale, it can be generosity, all these kind of things. And at the same time, you can achieve, you can admire Mies, for example, but also Lacaton Vasal for totally different reasons, but they both strike a chord. It's a totally different, but then you have other things that you can say it's very extremely difficult, complex, overworked, but yeah, it's architecture, but somehow it's distant. So in that sense, for me, it's almost a philosophical question: what is important? And it's not one line, it's not also not one vision, because that would be very poor, and there would be only one kind of good architect, which is totally not the case. You have many things, but in every different, I don't know even want to say style, but way of doing architecture, there's always good stuff. But yeah, it's a personal thing that.
Yeah, because you mentioned Lacaton and Vassal. I really want to say this because I wanted to say that I see some connections between your architecture and Lacaton and Vassal's architecture. And I'm just looking now at the Pritzker Prize website, and they say that one can also say about your architecture that is beautiful and pragmatic in the same time, and it's in a way a restorative architecture that is at once technological, innovative, and ecological responsive. So this is about Lacaton and Vassal on the Pritzker Prize, but I see some connections and some yeah.
Well, again, they're so influential simply by their narrative or way of dealing with circumstance, but also knowing what is important. And in that sense, we learn a lot from them. But you also understand that you're in a different context, and it's always different in that sense. But that's a good thing, because you understand that you can learn a lot from someone. And if you at the same time are very focused to your situation, it will never produce the same results. And that's nice as an architect. You don't have to worry to look at other good work. You need it as a kind of food.
Okay. And if Stefan, can I ask another question?
Sorry, you're on the flow, Christy. Please.
I'm on the flow. Yeah, thank you. On the floor. So you also said something about a building, doing somehow a building package in the first project. You do a basic structure that can be finished by the clients. And we also sometimes in our studio, we also struggle with this, even in our practice in the architectural studios, but also in the school. We got some questions from the students. How can they do this? How can they really find a line to stop the building and then to be finished by the clients? To build you said somehow a framework for life. So this building package, is it do you do this on purpose, or you want to do it often or more than in that project, or it was a special project?
It's interesting if you talk about a building package. It's ambiguous. It's the same thing like Prouvé. It's a building package, but in his best works, it is not anymore somehow. Or it's. I like even more the fact that it's demountable, that the layers are present, and then you can taking them away and use it for something else. This kind of idea of not melting everything into together, but like keeping them separate and have them have their own presence, let's say. And then what you say more about where to stop, I think it has more to do with doing what you can to make every process or every step as meaningful as possible. So first we do the primary structure, the basic structure, which you simply need, but we make it in itself that you can take it out and it has its own beauty and presence. Then you add the layer as a kind of, okay. And then if clients allow that, we can go further. Obviously, we can make a room, we can, and we can furbish it. But it's like, the last step is not crucial, and then if you cannot do that, it's failed. It gives you also a kind of comfort to understand life is so complex and these situations, unless you have clients with a lot of money, but then they have like crazy thoughts or bad taste. It's always something, but it's not so important. As soon as all the other steps are good, we had the kind of idea like, okay, and that's why we also take construction photos, and it is what we do, and then we can go as far as we want, but it's not that that you did a bad job if in the end the sofa isn't right or the light is not designed, it's, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Stefan?
And thank you, Christy. As a host, I wanted to ask you the final question, a light question. You said that you do the photographs yourself. You take them yourself.
Yes.
Yes, it's intriguing, in this contemporary architectural culture of visual images in the production phase of the project, in the project phase, also in the end phase. You don't put the accent neither in the first on the image, and at the end you take the photos yourself. And I find this very interesting. I like it very much as the idea that architects know how to see the building they're doing.
It's almost as if the work continues. This is part of the work somehow. As you would visualize, you also do this. It's an alibi of going back to the site, of course, but also to understand. And again, it's a question of perfection. You could say you have a professional photograph. These guys know what they do, and they will be always better in perfection and everything. Yes. But at the same time, there's a moment. There's a kind of this moment. If the photographer is not present, you cannot take this moment, and you cannot call 5 minutes before. You have to go now, because it doesn't work like that. And it's also something, and that's maybe important. I take the photographs, but we do it in the office. Meaning that, okay, sometimes somebody presses the button, but then we talk about it in the office, and we kind of select. Now it's more organically, but like in the beginning, it's like a way of looking back at your own work in a way. And then seeing why, and framing what kind of things are important, what do we want to show. It's an interesting discussion or question.
Thank you very much, Floris, for the time, for your generosity of being with us today, and also for being with us at the near student jury in the future. And I want to announce that Monday we will have as guest Gustav from the Norwegian office Ra Architecture, and that you will find this beautiful lecture online on our website MZCH. Thank you again. Thank you everybody for being with us today.
All right. Bye. Thank you all.